They thought Americans couldn't fight in the jungle. They were wrong. At the beginning of the Pacific War, the Japanese military carried a quiet but deep confidence into the fight. It was not arrogance without reason, but conviction built over years of hard experience. Japanese forces had fought across Asia in some of the most unforgiving environments on Earth: dense jungles, steep mountains, and tropical islands where heat, disease, and exhaustion were as deadly as any enemy. Their soldiers were trained to endure suffering, to move silently, to strike at night, and to survive where others failed. When the United States entered the war, many Japanese commanders did not see a rival shaped by the same hardships. They saw an industrial power, strong in factories and ships, but weak in the kind of combat the Pacific demanded. To them, American soldiers were well-equipped, well-fed, and fundamentally unprepared for jungle warfare. The Pacific, in their minds, was already Japanese territory. The early months of the war seemed to confirm that belief. Across the Pacific, American and Allied forces were pushed back again and again. Bases fell, airfields were lost, and islands were taken with shocking speed. Japanese units moved through the jungle with discipline and confidence, launching ambushes, infiltrating defensive lines, and attacking under the cover of darkness. For inexperienced Allied troops, the jungle felt alive, hostile, and impossible to control. Mud swallowed equipment, heat drained strength, and disease cut down men who had never faced such conditions. To many Japanese officers, the lesson appeared obvious. The Americans did not understand the jungle, and without that understanding, they could not win a long war in the Pacific. But while Japan measured success by territory gained and enemies pushed back, the United States was absorbing every failure. Each defeat became a lesson. Each mistake was studied, recorded, and shared. Beneath the surface of retreat and confusion, the Americans were adapting. That adaptation came into full view on Guadalcanal. What began in August 1942 as a limited American landing quickly turned into one of the most brutal and decisive struggles of the Pacific War. The conditions were relentless. Dense jungle choked movement, rain turned paths into swamps, and supply lines stretched thin across hostile seas. Japanese night attacks were swift and terrifying, striking suddenly and vanishing into the darkness. American units suffered heavy losses, often unsure where the enemy was or when the next attack would come. Yet something fundamentally different was happening on Guadalcanal, something Japan had not anticipated. The Americans did not withdraw permanently. They stayed, endured, and learned in the middle of the fight. American commanders began to change the way they fought. Patrols became more cautious and deliberate. Defensive perimeters were redesigned, layered, and reinforced. Positions were dug deeper, fields of fire were planned more carefully, and responses to infiltration were rehearsed repeatedly. Night fighting, once a Japanese advantage, was studied rather than feared. Flares, coordinated fire, and disciplined defensive tactics began to replace panic and confusion. The jungle, which had once felt like an enemy itself, slowly became something the Americans could navigate, survive, and eventually control. Logistics played a decisive role. Instead of relying on perfect plans, the United States relied on capacity. Supplies were pushed forward relentlessly: food, ammunition, medical equipment, and reinforcements. Wounded soldiers had a better chance of survival. Malaria and disease still took a heavy toll, but treatment improved and lessons were applied quickly. The American system, though imperfect, allowed for change while the war was still being fought. Japan, by contrast, was locked into rigid structures and limited resources that could not adjust at the same speed. Nowhere was this shift more evident than at night. Japanese forces had long believed that darkness belonged to them, that American soldiers feared the jungle after sunset. That belief became deadly. As American defenses improved, night assaults that once succeeded began to fail. Attack after attack was broken by repaired positions and overwhelming firepower.
Japan's most experienced soldiers, veterans who could not be easily replaced, were lost in increasing numbers. The jungle no longer favored one side alone. It had become a battlefield shaped by adaptation. Guadalcanal did not end the war, but it ended an illusion. The idea that Americans could not fight in the jungle was no longer sustainable. From that point forward, American jungle warfare steadily improved. In New Guinea, in the Solomons, and later in the Philippines, U.S. forces coordinated land, sea, and air power with growing precision. Amphibious logistics became routine. Commanders learned when to attack directly and when to bypass fortified positions altogether, cutting them off and rendering them irrelevant. The jungle was no longer a shield for Japanese forces, it was simply terrain. What Japan had believed would be an American weakness became one of the United States' greatest strengths, the ability to learn faster than the enemy expected. American soldiers did not arrive in the Pacific as jungle fighters, but they became them through experience, loss, and adaptation. They paid for that knowledge in blood, and they applied it relentlessly. The Japanese believed the jungle would protect them, that tradition and experience alone would decide the outcome. But wars are not won by belief. They are won by those who adapt. In the jungles of the Pacific, the United States adapted faster, endured longer, and ultimately changed the course of the war. The Americans did not merely survive the jungle. Over time, through learning and determination, they mastered it.
If you enjoy real stories about the wars of humanity, subscribe to WWH Tales. Here, we don't tell myths, we tell memories.